On March 29, 1997, specifically in the city of Jacksonville, Florida, 3 security guards were inside a vault containing millions of dollars. Suddenly, one of them turned around and found his colleague standing behind him, pointing a gun at his face. At first he thought it was a joke, so he laughed and didn't pay any attention. He told him to put the gun down and stop joking so they could finish up. But his colleague wasn't joking at all and was about to pull off the most valuable theft of the 20th century. I'm Antoni, and welcome to a world where truth is stranger than fiction. They say all stories sound the same, but not when I tell them. If you enjoy uncovering hidden mysteries, make sure to support the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss a story. Today I'm going to tell you the story of a person you'd never believe was a thief or criminal, because he spent his life protecting people's money. But due to work pressure and poor treatment, he began to hate his life and devised a plan for the most valuable theft of the 20th century. He simply managed to steal half a ton of money, 500 full kilos of banknotes. The story began in the state of Florida, specifically in Jacksonville. In this city, there was a branch of a company called Loomis Fargo. This company specialized in protecting the money of businesses and retail stores in Jacksonville. These companies and stores signed contracts with Loomis Fargo to transfer their money and place it in the company's fortified vaults. Of course, this would happen weekly and sometimes daily. Loomis Fargo would send armored vehicles to its contracted stores. Trained guards wearing body armor would get out and transport the money from the store into the vehicle, which would then carry the cash to the company's headquarters. The company headquarters was basically an armored fortress filled with steel vaults, guards, and continuous high-definition and thermal camera surveillance. In short, not even an ant could sneak in. With such specifications, Loomis Fargo was classified as the most secure financial vault in the U.S., second only to the National Vault and the Federal Reserve. But from the heart of all this security, and from inside the company headquarters, the theft happened. The thief who carried out the operation was the person whose life was most at risk in the company. He was also the most trustworthy employee in the entire company. His name was Philip Johnson, and his job was the hardest in the whole company. Johnson was born in Jacksonville in 1964. His job at the company was to transfer money from stores into the armored vehicle. He was the one who stood at the back doors of companies that needed to transfer money, the one who carried the money bags and cases and moved them to the vehicle. This job required someone well-trained and with nerves of steel, because in every transfer, he was the one most likely to be in danger. He was the only one physically carrying the money bags and walking through the streets, from stores to the transport vehicle. The other guards were either inside the vehicle or inside the stores monitoring the operation. The remaining employees worked at the Loomis Fargo office, which, as I mentioned, was a heavily fortified fortress. And if you're not convinced that his job was extremely dangerous, let me tell you that he was targeted 11 times in robbery attempts. In each of those, the robbers shot at him, and he was directly hit 7 times and taken to the hospital. But none of his injuries were fatal, and he returned to work as soon as he recovered. He never took more than a week off. Now you're probably thinking someone like that must have had a great salary and lots of perks, and that his position at the company was solid. But let me surprise you by telling you that he wasn't even a permanent employee. He was paid just $7 an hour, had no health insurance, and the company wasn't obligated to compensate him if he left the job or retired. So from beginning to end, it was a losing deal for him. But he had no other options and continued working at the company for 10 years. In 1997, at the age of 33, he said, "Enough is enough. I have to find a solution to my situation." He decided to rob the company. But this decision wasn't new. He'd been thinking about the theft and dreaming of it for a long time. According to sources, Johnson planned the theft for 5 months. During that time, he didn't do anything except imagine the luxurious life he'd live after robbing the company. But the actual planning didn't take more than 8 hours, spread over 4 days. So even then, he didn't put in much effort. And the plan worked. He managed to rob the company. Because of the time he had spent at the company, Johnson knew the work regulations by heart. He knew exactly the best time to carry out the theft and who the people would be on duty during that time. What most people didn't know was that the company had armored vaults, tons of cameras, and lots of guards. But Loomis Fargo spent $1.5 million a year on advertising, always promoting the idea that they were the most secure vault in the U.S. They based these ads on endorsements from senators and influential public figures, paying them large amounts to support this claim. The goal of this advertising was to attract more businesses and retailers to sign contracts. But Johnson knew the truth behind the ads. He knew all the money was kept in just one vault, while the rest were always empty, because the company's stored funds didn't require more than a single vault. He also decided the best place to execute the robbery was inside the building itself, and the best time to do it was a day before the semi-annual holiday. So he didn't think about robbing a company vehicle or arranging a heist on a van outside the building. No, he wanted to rob the building itself. He knew the best time was the day before the spring holiday. Most employees went out of town with their families, so the day before everyone would leave work early to prepare for travel. During the spring holiday, the number of guards dropped to a third. 70% of the staff would be away from the facility, so he wouldn't have to deal with more than a handful of employees. And thanks to his strong relationship with the attendance supervisor, he got to choose who would be on duty during the first 2 days after the break. He picked new hires who had never experienced any attacks. He figured these guys would be cooperative if they felt their lives were in danger. There was another reason for choosing this date. 90% of the businesses contracted with Loomis Fargo would also be on holiday, meaning they would deposit all their money into the company's vault right before the break. This meant the vault would be holding the largest possible amount of money. And that's exactly what happened. At 6 a.m., Johnson went out with the driver in the armored vehicle and began collecting money from the businesses. By 6 p.m., the van was full with over $9 million. When they reached company HQ, the garage gate opened. They checked the vehicle, verified Johnson and the driver's identities, and the vehicle entered the building normally. Johnson got out to move the money into the vault, with 2 guards who were already waiting inside. Terry Brown, who was suffering from severe depression and attending group therapy sessions, and Dan Smith, who worked as an internal guard at the company building, an untrained employee with no robbery defense experience, no weapon, and a chest condition that made it impossible for him to resist or pose any threat to Johnson. Now there was just one problem left for Johnson. Inside the vault, guards were unarmed. That meant while he and the other 2 were moving the money inside the vault, none of them had weapons. They all left their weapons in the guard room near the company's main entrance. So how could he threaten or scare his colleagues without a gun? Johnson was relying on one thing. He knew there was sometimes a gun kept in the surveillance room. If that gun happened to be in the building, the plan would work. Otherwise, he had no option but to back out and wait for the next holiday. Before starting the money transfer, Johnson asked Smith to go with him to the surveillance room, Smith's post. He told him he wanted to take off his body armor and drink some water. Being a senior, trusted employee, Smith said no problem. They both entered. Johnson took off his armor and couldn't think of a way to stall, so he asked Smith for a toothpick. Smith laughed and said, "What kind of request is that? Where am I going to get you a toothpick?" Johnson said, "Let's check the drawer, we might find one." While searching, Johnson noticed there was a gun in the first drawer. That was it. Everything was good, and the plan was on. They didn't find the toothpick. Johnson said, "Never mind. Let's go move the money." They left the room. Now here's a key point. During the money transfer inside the building, there were only 4 people present: the 3 guards and the armored vehicle driver. After 15 minutes, the driver left, and only the 3 guards remained inside. As I mentioned, all other employees had gone home. Only Brown and Smith were on duty, along with Johnson, who was supposed to leave after finishing the unloading. The 3 continued moving money into the vault. Johnson noticed the vault had way more cash than what they had collected that day. They kept moving money, and just before finishing, at exactly 7:15, Johnson told them he needed to go to the bathroom. There were only a few bags left, He told them to finish up and went to the surveillance room, turned off the cameras, put on the armor, grabbed the gun, and ran to the company garage. He made it before the vault door shut. He went to his van and got a bag he had prepared for the heist. You need to know that a week before the robbery, Johnson had sold his regular Ford car and bought a van instead, because his car couldn't hold much money. The van, on the other hand, was enclosed and could carry as much money as the company's armored trucks. His plan, in case police caught him, was not to resist or run away. The van was slow anyway. More importantly, he was desperate. He said, "Let's just roll with it. If the plan works, great. If not, God's will." According to the law, the maximum sentence was 6 years, so the risk was much smaller than the potential reward. So he said, "Let's leave it to God." He returned to the vault with his bag. Smith and Brown were still inside. When Brown looked up, he saw Johnson pointing the gun at him. Johnson told them to drop everything and come out, no resistance. The man laughed and said, "Stop joking." But this wasn't a joke. What's strange is that Johnson asked both of them to kneel on the ground in a prayer-like position and put their hands behind their backs. He handcuffed both their hands and feet. Neither of them resisted. He pulled the first one out of the vault and placed him in a small cleaning supplies room, then brought the second and locked them both in. No one fought back. No one made any unexpected moves. Honestly, if they were in on the robbery, they wouldn't have been more cooperative. A side note. During the investigation, one of the detectives said the guards weren't cowards. In fact, they were happy about what was happening. After a confidential internal poll at the company, it was discovered that 80% of the employees wished something like this would happen to management. The management treated employees terribly, and because of that, everyone sympathized with Johnson. That's why the guards felt no loyalty to the company and said they wouldn't risk a single hair on their bodies to protect the company from Johnson. Indeed, after locking them in the room, Johnson returned to the vault and began filling his bag with 1s, 50s, and 20s without anyone bothering him. After filling the bag, he went and put it in the van. He could have stopped there, but even at this point, he had two plans: either take just one bag or load the whole van. He thought, an opportunity like this comes once in a lifetime, so let's go back and keep loading. He went back into the building, opened the cleaning room, and asked Smith and Brown to loosen the cuffs. He told them to go ahead and drink some water and said he'd be back shortly. And indeed, Johnson returned to the vault, opened it again, and started loading bag after bag into the van, a second, third, fourth, and so on, until he had loaded nearly half a ton of cash. That's around 500 kilograms of banknotes. The total amount he stole exceeded $18 million in cash. Once he was done, he calmly closed the van doors, got in, and drove out of the company premises without resistance, without raising a single alarm. The van exited the compound as if it were just another routine delivery. Johnson knew the company's entry and exit protocols inside out and was fully aware that no one would notice anything was wrong until the next day. After leaving the premises, he drove to a location he had prepared in advance on the outskirts of the city, a rented warehouse under a fake name. There, he began transferring the cash inside, hiding it in special containers and bags he had arranged ahead of time, in a way no one would suspect. Then Johnson changed his appearance. He shaved, got a new haircut, and headed to a private airport. With a fake identity, he boarded a private plane he had booked weeks earlier and flew straight to South America, specifically to Brazil. Why Brazil? Because at the time, Brazil didn't extradite criminals who entered its territory before being caught, especially if they had no prior criminal record. Johnson started a new life there under a new name, living lavishly. He rented a huge villa and began spending heavily on luxury cars, parties, and real estate. But at the same time, he didn't show any signs of stress or fear. According to his plan, everything was calculated perfectly. However, as with everything in life, there's no such thing as a perfect crime. Months later, someone who had sold Johnson a piece of land became suspicious because Johnson paid entirely in cash and large sums, so he reported it to the authorities. Brazilian police contacted the FBI, and they began investigating him. After a full year of surveillance, they confirmed his true identity and arrested him. But the problem was, Brazil had no extradition treaty with the US at that time. So the FBI started applying diplomatic pressure. Eventually, Johnson was deported, not because Brazil agreed to extradite him, but because he had committed legal violations inside Brazil itself. He was expelled from the country, and when he landed back in the US, authorities were already waiting with an arrest warrant. He was tried and sentenced to 25 years in prison. But the full amount was never recovered. Out of the $18 million, the U.S. government only managed to recover around $6.5 million. The rest disappeared, and to this day, no one knows where it went. During the investigation, many agents said Johnson wasn't your typical thief. He was a mastermind, a genius in planning and execution. He never used violence or hurt anyone, and in his own eyes, it was a kind of revenge against a company that exploited him for 10 years without giving him his dues. And that's how the story ends. One of the most expensive and meticulously executed heists of the 20th century, pulled off by the very man who was supposed to protect the money. The world is full of mysteries. Some are waiting to be discovered, and others are better left untouched. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more strange and thrilling tales. Until next time, stay curious, stay mysterious, and see you next time.